Welcome back, beautiful minds. Have you ever noticed that the truth doesn't always arrive with applause? Sometimes it walks alone, mocked, doubted, and buried beneath louder lies. They laughed when you spoke. They questioned your instincts. They treated your certainty like arrogance. But truth has one terrifying habit: refuses to stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, every mask cracks, every false story collapses, and every secret demands daylight. The evidence they desperately tried to erase has finally surfaced. Now, the very people who dismissed you are staring at undeniable proof. And once justice wakes up, it doesn't ask for permission. It demands a price. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a lie receive standing ovations while the truth is forced to whisper from the shadows. Most people believe that being right should immediately bring recognition, respect, or validation. Reality has a crueler sense of humor. Sometimes the truth is treated like the villain because it arrives too early. People are uncomfortable with facts that challenge the stories they've already accepted. They don't reject the truth because it lacks evidence. They reject it because accepting it would force them to admit they were wrong. That admission feels heavier than carrying the lie, so they protect the illusion instead. When you stood by what you knew, you weren't simply defending an opinion. You were defending your own reality against a crowd determined to rewrite it. Every accusation thrown at you was another attempt to make you question your memory. Every sarcastic remark was designed to make you wonder whether your instincts had betrayed you. This is how manipulation works. It doesn't always try to destroy your reputation first. It tries to destroy your confidence in yourself. Once a person begins doubting their own judgment, they become easier to control. But you refuse to surrender that inner compass, even when it seemed like everyone else had chosen the easier path. The strange thing about deception is that it requires constant maintenance. A lie cannot survive on its own. It needs new lies to protect the old ones. Every false story demands another explanation. Every cover-up creates another loose end. Every person involved must remember what version they told yesterday so they can repeat it tomorrow. Truth never has that burden. It doesn't need rehearsals. It doesn't need editing. It simply waits, patiently, silently, confident that time eventually becomes its greatest ally. Imagine carrying a flame through a violent storm. Everyone around you insists the fire has already gone out. They laugh because they cannot see the small spark you're protecting with both hands. They tell you to stop pretending. They insist you are chasing something that no longer exists. But you keep walking, not because others believe in the flame, but because you can still feel its warmth. That quiet confidence becomes your greatest weapon. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It simply refuses to disappear. Many people abandon the truth because the waiting becomes unbearable. They crave immediate justice. They want instant proof. They want everyone who doubted them to apologize today, not someday. But life rarely moves according to human impatience. Justice often takes the scenic route. While you were waiting, something invisible was happening. Every inconsistency in the false story was growing larger. Every contradiction was becoming harder to explain. Every person protecting the lie was carrying a heavier emotional weight than the day before. They appeared confident on the outside, but inside they were becoming prisoners of the story they created. Meanwhile, your greatest challenge wasn't proving everyone else wrong. It was refusing to become someone you're not. Bitterness whispered in your ear. Anger invited you to retaliate. Pride tempted you to force the issue. Yet every emotional reaction would have distracted you from the one thing that mattered most, remaining anchored in what you knew to be true. That restraint wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It takes extraordinary strength to stay grounded while your name is misunderstood. People often confuse silence with defeat. They assume that if someone stops arguing, they've surrendered. But silence can also be strategy. Sometimes the strongest response is allowing reality to gather enough evidence that it speaks louder than your voice ever could. You don't need to win every argument when time is quietly collecting witnesses on your behalf. Think about how nature works. A seed spends months hidden beneath the soil before anyone believes it's alive. From the surface, nothing appears to be happening. Some even assume the seed failed. Yet beneath the darkness, roots are expanding, preparing for a moment no one can see. Truth follows the same pattern. It develops beneath appearances. While everyone celebrates the illusion above ground, reality is quietly building an unshakable foundation underneath. Those who built their confidence on deception rarely anticipate this moment. They believe popularity equals correctness. They mistake agreement for truth. As long as enough voices repeat the same fiction, they assume it becomes reality. History has exposed that mistake countless times. Crowds have defended falsehoods before. Entire groups have celebrated people who later collapsed under the weight of undeniable facts. Numbers never determine what is true. They only reveal how many people were willing to believe the same illusion at the same time. The pressure you endured became an invisible training ground. Every day you resisted the urge to compromise your integrity. Your resilience grew stronger. Every moment you chose patience over panic, your character became more difficult to break. While others invested their energy into protecting appearances, you invested yours into protecting your principles. One investment fades, the other compounds. The day truth finally emerges often feels strangely quiet. There are no dramatic soundtracks, no magical announcement, just a simple moment when the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the conversations change. The same people who questioned you begin speaking more carefully. The confidence of those who mocked you starts to crack. The story they spent so much effort protecting begins collapsing under its own weight because truth was never buried. It was simply waiting for the moment when no amount of denial could keep it hidden any longer. The moment evidence begins to speak, something extraordinary happens. The room doesn't become louder. It becomes quieter. The people who once argued with endless confidence suddenly search for new words. Those who confidently repeated accusations now hesitate before finishing their sentences. Why? Because opinions can dominate a conversation, but facts dominate reality. For a long time, they believed they controlled the narrative. They believed that if enough people accepted their version of events, it would become permanent. But every false narrative carries a hidden weakness. It depends on people continuing to believe it. The truth doesn't require belief. It simply requires discovery. There is a dangerous illusion many people live by. They assume perception is more powerful than reality. They think if they can shape how others see you, they've successfully changed who you are. That strategy works for a while. Reputations can be manipulated, stories can be twisted, context can be removed. A single lie repeated often enough can temporarily overshadow years of honesty. But illusion has an expiration date. Eventually, something refuses to fit the story. A missing detail appears. A forgotten message resurfaces. A witness remembers what everyone else ignored. One small crack forms, and suddenly the entire structure begins collapsing under its own weight. The fascinating part is that lies rarely fail because someone heroic defeats them. They usually fail because they become too complicated to maintain. Every fabricated story creates another responsibility. Every deception demands another performance. The people protecting it become actors trapped inside a script they can never stop performing. Every conversation becomes stressful because they must remember what version they shared before. Every unexpected question feels like a threat. They live with constant anxiety, not because someone is chasing them, but because truth is patiently walking behind them. While they were busy protecting appearances, you were protecting consistency. You didn't need 10 different explanations because your story never changed. It remained stable whether people believed it or not. That stability became your greatest advantage. At first, nobody noticed it. Consistency rarely attracts immediate attention because it lacks drama. People are naturally drawn toward loud emotions, shocking claims, and exciting accusations. Quiet integrity doesn't make headlines, but over time, consistency becomes impossible to ignore. The same words, the same character, the same calm confidence. Eventually, people begin asking themselves why your version never needed correction, while everyone else's kept changing. Human psychology has an interesting weakness. People become emotionally attached to the stories they've invested in. Admitting they were fooled feels like admitting they were foolish. That's why many continue defending obvious falsehoods long after the evidence appears. They're no longer protecting the lie, they're protecting their own pride. Pride can be stronger than logic. Ego can become louder than reason. But evidence has a unique power. It doesn't argue with emotions, it simply exists. A document doesn't care who likes it. A recording doesn't care about popularity. A fact has no interest in winning debates. Its only purpose is to reveal reality. When undeniable proof finally surfaces, people experience something psychologists often describe as cognitive conflict. Their minds struggle to hold two opposing beliefs at once. On one side is the story they defended. On the other is the evidence sitting directly in front of them. Eventually, one must collapse. Reality always wins that battle, even if acceptance comes slowly. Some people will apologize. Others will quietly disappear. A few will pretend they supported you from the beginning. Not because they suddenly changed their values, but because they cannot survive being associated with a narrative that has already fallen apart. You may wonder why truth sometimes waits so long before revealing itself. The answer is uncomfortable. Time exposes character as much as evidence exposes facts. While the lie was growing, people revealed who they really were. Some rushed to judge without understanding. Others enjoyed your suffering because it entertained them. A few stayed silent out of fear, and a rare handful refused to abandon fairness, even when doing so was unpopular. Delayed truth doesn't just expose deception. It exposes loyalty, integrity, courage, and weakness in everyone involved. One of the greatest mistakes you could make at this stage is confusing vindication with revenge. They are not the same thing. Revenge seeks emotional satisfaction through someone else's pain. Vindication restores what was always true. When evidence speaks for you, you no longer need to shout. The truth becomes your voice. The facts become your defense. Every document, every witness, every overlooked detail begins speaking on your behalf without asking your permission. That is a different kind of power. It cannot be dismissed as emotion because it is rooted in reality. Ironically, the people who worked hardest to silence you often become the ones who amplify your credibility. Their failed attempts to hide the facts draw even more attention once the truth emerges. The questions become impossible to avoid. Why was this hidden? Why was this ignored? Why were they so desperate to protect a story that couldn't survive simple scrutiny? Those questions become louder than any accusation they ever made against you. The collapse of a false narrative is never just about proving someone wrong. It is about restoring balance. Reality has a way of correcting itself even after long periods of confusion. The masks begin to slip. The performances lose their audience. The carefully crafted illusion fades under the weight of undeniable proof. And in that quiet moment, when facts finally stand where opinions once ruled, every false narrative loses the only thing that ever kept it alive: the willingness of people to believe it. There comes a moment in every battle for truth when something unexpected happens. The people you thought would remain silent forever begin to move. Not because they suddenly became fearless overnight, but because the weight of what they know becomes heavier than the comfort of pretending nothing happened. Silence feels safe only for so long. Eventually, conscience starts collecting interest on every quiet compromise. What was once easy to ignore becomes impossible to sleep with. That is when ordinary people begin making extraordinary choices. The strange thing about courage is that it rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive wearing a cape or demanding attention. It appears in small decisions. Someone refuses to repeat another lie. Someone chooses not to laugh at another false accusation. Someone finally says, "That's not what really happened." Those words may seem insignificant, but they carry the power to change everything. Every movement toward justice begins with one person deciding that truth deserves a voice. Many people assume allies are found during moments of success. In reality, genuine allies are revealed during moments of isolation. When your reputation was under attack, when whispers followed your name, and when doubt surrounded every step you took, very few people wanted to be associated with you. Standing beside someone who has been unfairly judged requires emotional strength. It means risking criticism. It means accepting that others may question your loyalty or your judgment. Most people avoid that discomfort because acceptance feels more valuable than integrity. They choose the crowd over their conscience, but not everyone is built that way. Some individuals possess a quiet strength that refuses to bow to public opinion. They observe before speaking. They question before judging. They understand that popularity and truth are not the same thing. While others rush toward conclusions, these people paid attention to details everyone else ignored. They noticed inconsistencies. They remembered conversations others conveniently forgot. They recognized that something about the story never felt complete. At first, they remained silent, not because they agreed with the deception, but because they lacked enough certainty to challenge it. Then something changed. Another piece of evidence appeared. Another contradiction surfaced. Another carefully hidden fact found its way into the light. Suddenly, everything they had quietly questioned began making sense. The scattered pieces formed a complete picture. What once looked like coincidence now revealed a pattern. What once seemed unbelievable became undeniable. And in that moment, remaining silent no longer felt neutral. Silence became participation. Looking away became a choice. Doing nothing became another way of protecting the lie. That realization transforms people. The most powerful allies are often those who have experienced regret. They know what it feels like to stay quiet when they should have spoken. They understand the cost of ignoring injustice because they've carried that burden before. When they recognize the same pattern unfolding again, something inside them refuses to repeat history. They step forward, not because it is convenient, but because they refuse to become another silent witness. Notice something important. These people are not fighting because they expect applause. In many cases, standing with you damages their own comfort. Friends may turn against them, colleagues may distance themselves, opportunities may disappear. They understand that defending the truth sometimes carries a personal cost. Yet they accept it anyway because some values are worth more than temporary approval. Integrity cannot be purchased with popularity, and courage cannot be measured by convenience. The people who built their influence through manipulation never expected this shift. Their confidence depended on isolation. As long as you stood alone, they believed the narrative remained under their control. Isolation weakens resistance. It convinces a person that nobody sees the truth. But once one honest voice appears, others begin recognizing that they are not alone either. Confidence spreads. Fear begins shrinking. What started as one courageous decision becomes a chain reaction. This is why deception fears unity more than disagreement. A lie can survive one critic. It struggles against many independent voices speaking the same truth. Every new witness makes denial more difficult. Every honest testimony reduces the space where manipulation can hide. The people who once relied on intimidation suddenly discover that fear is losing its grip. They can silence one person. Silencing everyone becomes impossible. Perhaps the most remarkable part is that your allies are not perfect people. They have doubts, they have fears. Some wish they had spoken sooner. Others blame themselves for believing the wrong story at first. But perfection was never the requirement. What matters is the decision they make when reality becomes clear. Character is not measured by never making mistakes. It is measured by what someone does after recognizing the mistake. As more people choose honesty over comfort, the emotional balance begins to shift. The pressure that once rested entirely on your shoulders slowly moves elsewhere. Those who created the deception now feel what you once felt. They begin explaining themselves. They become defensive. They search desperately for excuses. The confidence they displayed during your isolation fades because they realize the audience is no longer listening with blind trust. And while all of this unfolds, you learn one of life's greatest lessons. You were never meant to force people to believe you. Your responsibility was to remain faithful to the truth, even when it stood alone. The right people were never going to appear because you begged for their support. They would arrive because reality eventually gave them no honest reason to stand anywhere else. The greatest mistake your critics made was believing your strength came from winning arguments. They assumed that if they could discredit your words, they could weaken your character. They focused on attacking your reputation because they never understood where your real power lived. It wasn't hidden inside applause, popularity, or public approval. It was rooted in integrity. Integrity is dangerous because it cannot be borrowed, stolen, or manufactured. It is built through thousands of unseen decisions, and once it becomes part of who you are, manipulation begins losing its grip. Manipulation thrives in confusion. Its purpose is to make people question what they know, distrust what they feel, and abandon what they believe. It creates emotional storms because storms make people easier to control. When emotions become louder than principles, judgment begins to collapse. That is why those determined to control others often provoke anger, fear, shame, or guilt. They know a person reacting emotionally is less likely to think clearly. Their greatest weapon is not the lie itself. It is the emotional chaos surrounding it. You unknowingly broke that strategy. Instead of allowing every accusation to reshape your identity, you stayed connected to something deeper than public opinion. You understood that who you are cannot be decided by those committed to misunderstanding you. Every attempt to provoke an emotional collapse became another opportunity for discipline. Every insult tested your patience. Every false accusation challenged your self-control. Without realizing it, you were building something stronger than confidence. You are building stability. Stability unsettles manipulative people because it cannot be predicted. They expect emotional reactions. They prepare for explosive arguments. They anticipate desperate attempts to defend yourself. When those reactions never arrive, they become frustrated. Their entire strategy depends upon controlling your behavior. If they cannot predict how you will respond, they begin losing control over the situation itself. Imagine trying to push over a tree whose roots extend far beneath the ground. At first glance, the trunk may not appear extraordinary. It doesn't demand attention. It simply stands. Storm after storm crashes into it, yet it refuses to fall. Meanwhile, smaller plants with brighter colors disappear after the first strong wind. Strength was never about appearance. It was always about the roots no one could see. Character works the same way. People often admire confidence because it looks powerful, but confidence without integrity becomes arrogance. Reputation without honesty becomes performance. Success without principles becomes temporary. Character, however, survives every changing season because it is not dependent upon external conditions. It remains steady whether people celebrate you or criticize you. That consistency becomes impossible to imitate. Those attempting to manipulate your image underestimated something incredibly important. Lies can attack behavior, but they struggle to destroy patterns of integrity. One accusation might convince people for a moment. Two accusations may create doubt, but years of consistent honesty quietly speak louder than temporary rumors. People eventually begin comparing the accusation with the person they have consistently observed. The contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. They notice that your actions refuse to match the story others tried to create. Manipulators dislike time because time exposes consistency. They rely on immediate emotional reactions before thoughtful reflection begins. If people pause long enough to observe patterns instead of isolated moments, deception starts weakening. Patterns reveal character. One generous action can be staged. A lifetime of integrity cannot. One honest statement may be questioned. Years of honesty become increasingly difficult to dismiss. Perhaps that is why remaining calm became one of your greatest victories. Calmness should never be mistaken for weakness. It often represents extraordinary internal discipline. Remaining composed while being misunderstood requires more strength than reacting with anger. Anyone can shout, anyone can insult, anyone can seek revenge. Very few people possess enough self-mastery to protect their peace while others attempt to destroy it. Your calmness also forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. Why wasn't your story changing? Why weren't you responding with panic? Why did your actions remain consistent despite increasing pressure? Those questions slowly redirected attention away from the accusations and toward the people making them. Suddenly, scrutiny changed direction. Instead of examining your integrity, people began examining theirs. This is where manipulation begins collapsing under its own weight. Those who depended on emotional chaos must now explain their own behavior. Every exaggeration becomes suspicious. Every contradiction attracts attention. Every desperate attempt to maintain control only reveals how fragile their position has become. Ironically, the harder they fight to preserve the illusion, the more obvious the illusion becomes. Your integrity also created something unexpected. It inspired trust in people who had never even met you personally. Human beings naturally recognize consistency over time. Even without knowing every detail, they sense when someone's behavior aligns with their words. Trust grows quietly through repeated evidence, not dramatic speeches. Every honest decision you made became another brick in a foundation that others eventually learned to stand upon. That foundation becomes nearly impossible to destroy because it is built on reality instead of performance. Performance requires constant maintenance. Integrity requires only consistency. One depends on convincing people. The other depends on being genuine. One survives through appearances. The other survives through truth. In the end, the people who tried to manipulate your identity unknowingly strengthened it. Every challenge became another opportunity to demonstrate patience. Every false accusation became another chance to remain consistent. Every attempt to shake your confidence forced your roots to grow even deeper. They believed pressure would expose weakness. Instead, it revealed character so steady that no amount of manipulation could bend it away from the truth. Every action creates an echo. Some echoes return in seconds, while others travel through years before finding their way back. That is why many people mistake delayed consequences for escaped consequences. They convince themselves that because nothing happened immediately, nothing will happen at all. But life has never operated on human impatience. Justice moves differently. It doesn't rush because it doesn't need to. It waits until every choice has revealed its true nature, until every hidden intention has exposed itself, and until every person involved has unknowingly written the final chapter of their own story. Those who built their success on deception often mistake silence for victory. They celebrate too early because they believe the absence of consequences is proof they were clever enough to avoid them. They smile while others suffer. They continue repeating the same patterns because each successful lie strengthens their confidence. But confidence built on dishonesty is fragile. It grows quickly, yet it collapses just as fast. The higher it climbs, the harder it falls. One of the greatest misconceptions about justice is that it always arrives wearing a judge's robe or carrying an obvious punishment. Real justice is often quieter than that. Sometimes it arrives through lost trust. Sometimes through broken relationships. Sometimes through opportunities that suddenly disappear. Sometimes through the inability to sleep peacefully, despite having everything money can buy. Consequences rarely ask for permission before entering someone's life. They simply arrive when the conditions have finally been created. Think about a crack in the foundation of a massive building. At first, nothing appears wrong. People continue walking through the halls. Meetings continue. Lights remain on. Visitors admire the structure because everything still looks impressive from the outside. But beneath the surface, pressure continues building. Every passing day weakens the support holding everything together. Then one ordinary moment changes everything. The collapse seems sudden to everyone watching, but in reality it began long before anyone noticed. The same principle applies to dishonesty. Every lie forces a person to carry invisible weight. At first it feels manageable. They convince themselves they can keep everything under control. But lies accumulate. Secrets multiply. Fear becomes constant. They begin worrying about forgotten conversations, unexpected questions, or people discovering information they thought was permanently hidden. Even during moments of celebration, anxiety quietly sits beside them. They may appear successful, but internally they become prisoners of the very deception they created. Meanwhile, you may have wondered whether fairness even existed. Watching someone benefit from manipulation can make anyone question the value of integrity. There are moments when honesty feels expensive, while deception seems profitable. Those moments test more than patience. They test identity. They ask whether your principles depend upon immediate rewards or whether your character remains steady even when life appears unfair. Many people fail that test because they become obsessed with revenge. Revenge promises quick emotional satisfaction. It whispers that making others suffer will heal your own wounds. But revenge often traps people inside the same darkness they were trying to escape. It keeps attention fixed on the past instead of building the future. Justice, however, is different. Justice restores balance without demanding that you sacrifice your peace in the process. Notice how those consumed by deception slowly begin turning against one another. Distrust enters every relationship they build because people willing to betray others eventually fear betrayal themselves. Suspicion replaces loyalty. Every conversation becomes a calculation. Every partnership carries hidden doubts. They wonder who might expose them next because they understand exactly how dishonesty works. After all, they perfected it. Ironically, the environment they created for others eventually becomes the environment they must live inside. There is another consequence many people overlook. Every dishonest decision shapes the person making it. Character is not destroyed in one dramatic moment. It erodes through repeated compromises. The first lie may feel uncomfortable. The second becomes easier. The third feels normal. Eventually, they no longer recognize the person staring back at them in the mirror because they traded integrity for convenience, one decision at a time. The punishment is not only what happens to them, it is what they slowly become. At the same time, your own journey was shaping you in the opposite direction. Every difficult choice strengthened your discipline. Every moment you refused to abandon your values deepened your resilience. Pain became your teacher instead of your prison. Disappointment refined your patience instead of poisoning your spirit. While others invested energy into protecting false images, you invested yours into becoming someone whose character required no disguise. This difference becomes impossible to ignore over time. One path produces constant fear of exposure. The other produces quiet confidence. One demands endless performance. The other allows genuine peace. One depends on controlling how people think. The other depends on living honestly regardless of what people think. Eventually, consequences begin arriving from every direction at once. The truth surfaces. Trust disappears. Reputations fracture. Doors that once opened effortlessly begin closing without explanation. The people who encourage deception quietly distance themselves to protect their own image. Excuses lose their power because reality now speaks louder than carefully crafted stories. And in that defining moment, those who believed they had escaped accountability finally discover a lesson life has repeated throughout history. No deception is powerful enough to outrun the consequences created by its own existence. There is a strange moment that arrives after the truth has finally been revealed. Most people imagine it will feel like a celebration. They picture applause, dramatic apologies, and the satisfaction of watching every doubter admit they were wrong. But when that moment actually comes, it often feels much quieter than expected. You realize something profound. The greatest victory was never making other people lose. It was refusing to lose yourself while they were trying to convince the world that you deserved to. Being proven right is not about feeding your ego. It is about restoring reality. For a long time, people tried to replace truth with perception. They wanted appearances to become more important than facts. They hoped that if enough voices repeated the same false story, it would erase what actually happened. But reality has an incredible ability to survive even the loudest lies. It bends under pressure, but it never breaks. Eventually, it returns exactly where it belongs. That is the difference between revenge and vindication. Revenge depends on another person's suffering. Vindication depends on the truth becoming impossible to ignore. One keeps your attention chained to the people who hurt you. The other frees you from needing their approval forever. The moment the truth stands on its own, you no longer need to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Their opinions stop carrying weight because reality has already answered every question they once used against you. Many people spend years dreaming about the day everyone finally believes them. They imagine that recognition will heal every wound. Yet healing rarely arrives through someone else's apology. It begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by another person's acceptance. If your peace depends on those who betrayed you admitting they were wrong, they still control your emotional world. Real freedom begins when your identity no longer waits for permission from people who never valued it in the first place. Look closely at history, and you'll notice a repeating pattern. Some of the strongest individuals were doubted before they were respected. Their ideas were mocked before they were admired. Their character was questioned before it was celebrated. The common thread wasn't immediate recognition, it was persistence. They continued walking in truth long before truth became popular. That persistence became the foundation of every victory that followed. The remarkable thing about vindication is that it changes more than public opinion. It changes your relationship with yourself. Every difficult day you survived becomes proof that you are stronger than you once believed. Every false accusation you endured without abandoning your principles becomes evidence of your resilience. Every lonely moment reminds you that your character was never dependent on having a crowd standing behind you. This creates a confidence that cannot be manufactured. It is different from arrogance because it doesn't need to prove anything. Arrogance constantly demands attention. Quiet confidence simply exists. It no longer feels threatened by criticism because it has already survived misunderstanding. It no longer panics when others doubt it because it has already learned that today's rejection may become tomorrow's respect. Ironically, many of the people who once opposed you begin changing their behavior. Some offer sincere apologies because they genuinely regret what happened. Others attempt to rewrite history, pretending they supported you all along. A few avoid you completely because your presence reminds them of choices they wish they could undo. Their reactions are no longer your responsibility. Your responsibility is deciding whether you will continue carrying the emotional weight of a battle that has already ended. One of the greatest dangers after vindication is becoming trapped by bitterness. Pain has a way of convincing people that they must remain emotionally connected to their past in order to protect themselves. But carrying resentment is like continuing to fight a war after the battlefield has emptied. It drains energy that could have been invested in building something greater. Your future deserves more attention than your wounds. Think about a mountain climber who finally reaches the summit after years of struggle. The purpose of reaching the top is not to stare forever at the difficult path behind them. The purpose is to see a horizon that was impossible to recognize while climbing. Vindication creates the same opportunity. It gives you a new perspective. The obstacles that once seemed overwhelming now become chapters of a story that shaped your strength rather than defining your identity. The people who tried to stop you often believed your greatest dream was proving them wrong. They never imagined your real goal would become something much bigger. While they remained focused on the conflict, you learned to focus on growth. While they measured success by defeating someone else, you discovered success through becoming someone impossible to break. That shift changes everything because your future is no longer built upon what they did to you. It is built upon what you chose to become despite them. When truth finally restores your name, it does more than correct the past. It opens doors that could never have been trusted to a version of you still seeking validation. You begin attracting relationships built on honesty instead of appearances. You recognize opportunities that once would have been hidden behind insecurity. You move with a sense of purpose that no accusation can steal because your confidence is no longer borrowed from public opinion. It has been earned through endurance, strengthened by integrity, and refined by every trial that tried to convince you to surrender before the truth had its chance to speak.